All right, let's talk about attributional style. We've talked about this a little bit so far in class, so I'm going to maybe be reminding you of something. So let's imagine that you've had a breakup. Your heart has been broken. One way to attribute the outcome would be to use a temporary explanation, right? This is hard, but I'll get through it, right? A specific attribution. My partner and I weren't a good match. An external attribution. Our relationship wasn't meant to be. Something that it's not about them, it's not about me, it's about it wasn't a good match, it wasn't meant to be. I'd like to point out that in the external attribution, honestly, blaming it on your now ex is an external explanation also. And so I would say technically it's in the it's in this same category of positive ways to attribute this outcome, right? So it's if I found out that my partner wasn't trustworthy, or I found out that my partner was cheating, or I found out that my partner didn't have the interests that my partner had led me to believe they did, or whatever. I was let down in some fashion and it's my partner's fault. That is something that will actually fall into this category of like the more positive way to do. It's going to lead to more successful coping. Even though it sounds kind of mean to blame your partner, especially when it really wasn't a bait and switch situation or something, it's actually better for our own personal mental health. It's not great for the ex-partner to hear that these are the ways that you're explaining it, but it's good for us. Now, on the other hand, if you use a stable attribution, I'm never going to get over this. I will always feel as bad about this breakup as I feel about it right now. If you think it's global, that all the good men or all the good women have been taken, there's nobody decent out there to date, everybody's awful, it always is going to work out like this. And if you do an internal attribution, I'm unlovable, right? So if any part of this, or worse yet, all three of these, you tend to have a tendency towards depression. It's going to lead to negative outcomes. If you might have a stable attribution, I'll never get over this. That's going to make you feel more depressed. Or you might have a global one. Man, there is nobody decent to date anymore. Or you might have an internal one. I'm unlovable. But if you manage to get all three of them, get two of them, your probability of a negative reaction goes up. So attributional style is one of those big factors, and you can kind of see where optimism or hope fits in here, can't you? You can kind of see the language that looks like maybe hopeful language, right? On the right hand side, the successful coping, you see this hopefulness, right? This is hard, but I'll get through it. I have hope. My partner and I weren't a good match, comma, but my good match is out there. I will find my person. Our relationship wasn't meant to be. Okay. There's a relationship that is meant to be. For maybe our relationship wasn't meant to be because I need to be available to find my real person, right? These are very hopeful ways to kind of recast what's going on. Whereas you can see more like despair happening on the negative side, right? I'll never get over this. That sounds pretty despairing, doesn't it? All of the good possible dating partners are gone. That's pretty despairing. I'm unlovable. Oh, that's very despairing. So if a person is making the more successful coping kinds of attributions, you can see inherent in it the hope and the optimism. If they're making the more depression related negative attributions, you can see the despair and the lack of hope. So when we talk about attributional style, we've got, sort of this idea of a hopeful attitude, right? So let's say that we think the relationship between how much effort we put in, and we have good study habits and self-discipline and realistic positive expectations. Two different studies had looked at sort of this conglomeration of a hopeful attitude, and found that my animation is messed up. Sorry. So Knoll et al. 1987, and then Peterson and Barrett 1987 both found that effort, good study habits, self-discipline, and realistic positive expectations were all associated with good grades. Otogen and Mayer came back in 2002 and looked at fantasies, and that refers to like visualizing success and imagining where you want to be at the end of this and that kind of thing. That was not Otogen and Mayer found that the effort, good study habits, self-discipline, and realistic positive expectations all were linked to good grades, but explicitly fantasies was not. And so, having a hopeful attitude, you'll notice, has a lot to do with grit, that sort of stick to itiveness, the tenacity that we've been talking about across the quarter, plus the realistic positive expectations, the realistic optimism that we're talking about in this chapter. Those seem to be the most important factors. Now, what about defensive pessimism? I brought this up a little bit in a previous lecture when I was talking about self-handicapping, and I kind of threw out this notion as well. When we are displaying defensive pessimism, we set low expectations for future performance, despite having done well in similar situations in the past. The example I gave previously was like, well, I haven't practiced in a while, so I don't know how well I'll be able to play the piano right now. That's setting low expectations. Even though I used to be a great piano player, I used to do it all the time. But I don't want you to think I can necessarily do that anymore. So, just be aware I haven't practiced in a long time. It sets low expectations so that if you exceed those expectations, that's good. If you don't exceed those expectations, it helps to cushion the blow. Right? If you sit down in front of your friend and start playing the piano and you keep stumbling and having to start over again, I told you I haven't practiced in a long time. Right? So it's not as embarrassing that I'm revealing the fact that I haven't practiced in a long time. Now, one of the reasons why we do it is to help cushion the blow, that's for sure. But also, when we're defensive like that to ourselves, we don't have to even do it in front of people. We could be just thinking those thoughts in our heads. And one of the things that can be useful about thinking those thoughts in our head is that those thoughts help to focus our attention on the possible problems that might be encountered. So let's take my same piano example, and maybe our friend is not currently there, but we know that we're going over to our friend's house and they have a piano, and they might ask us to play. Maybe they knew us back when we played all the time. So maybe we would go ahead and practice right now. Even if we don't have a piano, we could at least sit down at the table and sort of go through the finger work that might be needed for playing the piano, right? So that if I get the opportunity to sit down, I won't completely embarrass myself because I did realize that the lack of practice might lead to poor performance. So I will practice a little bit, right? Like I'm going to focus the attention on the problems, and that will help to reduce the likelihood of those problems ever coming to fruition. We can work hard to prepare for the situation of the performance. That's one of the things that might come from focusing attention on the problems. We might say, you know what? I may not perform up to capacity unless I step back and get ready for that performance. We might be able to take the nervousness that we might embarrass ourselves and harness it and use it as motivation, right? I don't want to embarrass myself, so I'm going to put in the work now so that I don't have to face that possible outcome in the future. A lot of times, this only really defensive pessimists will take this step. A naive optimist definitely would say, I'm sure it'll be fine, and maybe just distract themselves. Instead of feeling anxious and worried that they might embarrass themselves, they might just think about something else or do something else and not worry about it. Try not to worry about it. Right? Whereas a person with a little bit of defensive pessimism, maybe a realistic optimist, would be saying, you know what? I don't want to embarrass myself. I'm going to spend a few minutes right now, limbering up my finger joints and getting ready because there I might be asked to play. And if I don't get asked to play, no big deal, but at least I'm ready if that happens, right? So I'm going to harness that anxiety and use it as motivation. All right. So some things that also are associated with health that I wanted to kind of parse out and separate or combine with optimism, depending on where we're going here. What about the relationship between religiosity and health? There has been for a really long time a well-standing correlation between life expectancy and how much time a person spends engaged in their religious faith. And so you have life expectancy in years on the y-axis, and then you have like separated groups of people who never attend a religious service, less than weekly, weekly, or more than weekly. There's really no difference, honestly, between the less than weekly, the weekly, and the more than weekly. Where you see the difference is the never attended. So And we're talking just about religious attendance. We're not even really talking about like adherence or depth of faith or depth of belief. We're talking about people who are going to religious services. So, what is going on there? What could account for why religiosity would be associated with greater health? One big factor is that religions oftentimes convey messages of hope and optimism. There are some other factors though, so let's hold on to the other factors for a second. There are some healthy behaviors that are associated with longevity, like for example, not smoking. So on the y-axis in this one, we have the risk of dying relative to others. And so if everything was equal, you would have a 100% risk of dying relative to other people of your same age and sex. Like that, you'd be at the 100%. So anything that's lower than 100% means that this thing is associated with a lower risk of dying. So not smoking is associated with less likelihood of dying for both males and females. Little less for females, but whatever. Regular exercise is associated with a lower risk of dying, and then weekly religious attendance, and particularly for females. Females in particular experience a significant drop in their risk of dying. Males have a drop, but not as dramatic as the females have when they attend religious services. So, what is that about? All right, we'll come back to that. All right, so there are some intervening factors in the association between religiosity and health. So we've got religious involvement on the left, and then we've got better health on the right. But there are things that go on between the religious involvement and the better health that are what we call intervening variables that might account for why it appears that religious involvement is the important thing when in fact it's maybe these intervening variables. So, religious involvement oftentimes encourages healthier behaviors. On average, people who are religiously active they do less smoking, they do less drinking. Not 100% and not perfect, but less. They tend to experience greater social support. I really think this might be one of the factors in why women in particular experience a significant drop in the risk of dying. Social support is super important. And especially for women who have a lot of like social relationships that they manage, like children and their own parents and other things. Like a lot of times women are the sort of social directors for any family. And so having social support is really super important for women in ways that might not be as important for men to get from a religious situation. And so that might be one of the big factors for the difference between men and women on that is social support, super important. And then, of course, religious involvement oftentimes leads to positive emotions like hope or optimism or coherence. Coherence refers to sort of an acceptance of an explanation for why we're here and what life is about and what really matters in life and things like that. It gives us a sense of coherence to participate in religious services. And so that may be a super important factor in determining how optimistic a person is and then how much that has an impact on health. So, there might even be more things than what's depicted in this graph that comes from religious involvement and that may also contribute to better health. So keep that stuff in mind that yes, religious involvement seems to be associated with better health, but it might be, really strongly through these positive emotions and hope and optimism and coherence that are provided by religious attendance. If you take out if you control for the healthy behaviors, less smoking and drinking, you control for those. That means if you compare people who attend religious services versus those who don't, and you match them to make sure that you have equal numbers of people who smoke and don't smoke and don't drink and stuff like that, if you control for that, you still have 75% of the longevity difference remaining, being attributable to religious involvement. So healthy behaviors are probably not the reason why religious involvement leads to better health. It's probably those positive emotions and then the social support that are really important in helping to improve health among those who attend religious services. So I thought I'd leave you with this brilliant insight that positive psychology isn't new. A lot of times we feel like it is, and I know it was really super popular right around the turn of the last century, 2000, it really was taking off. But look at this quote. Sit all day in a moping posture, sigh and reply to everything with a dismal voice, and your melancholy lingers. If we wish to conquer undesirable emotional tendencies in ourselves, we must go through the outward movements of those contrary dispositions which we prefer to cultivate. This comes from William James, one of the earliest, well, certainly one of the earliest American psychologists. He wrote one of the first psychology texts in 1890. And this comes from that. Aren't you glad that this isn't the book that you're ever assigned to read? The writing is so much. Melancholy means sadness, right? Dismal means, you know, negative, kind of hopeless. And so he's arguing that if you act like a person who's sad and upset, you will be a person who is sad and upset. If you act like a person who is optimistic, upbeat, and energetic, you will be a person who's optimistic, upbeat, and energetic. That's his point with this argument. And it's something that I've said a couple of times during class. We could shorten this quote to one that comes from AA that says, fake it till you make it. AA is Alcoholics Anonymous, right? They say, fake it till you make it. Pretend like you're a person who doesn't drink alcohol every day. Every day, say to yourself, I'm going to be a person who doesn't drink alcohol. Next thing you know, you'll be a person who doesn't drink alcohol. If you do the behaviors, you will become the very thing that you are displaying. And so, this is something that has been part of psychology since the very beginning. That's the message I wanted to leave you with at the end of this chapter. So hopefully, haha, pun intended, since the title of the chapter was hope, hopefully this little brief look into hope has been helpful for you, and I will see you in the next video.